Well, thank you, everyone. I believe we are for it now and all of our witnesses are in attendance. So I will declare open the public hearing of the Standing Committee on Education's inquiry into building Asia capability in Australia through the education system and beyond. And I acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we are meeting today, and pay respects to elders past and present of the Indigenous peoples from across Australia. This hearing will be broadcast and the transcript of proceedings will be published on the Parliament's website. I'll just briefly invite members of the committee present here today to introduce themselves. Maybe we'll start with the Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Sam Birrell, member for Nichols in Northern Victoria.
I can jump in next. Zee Soon, the member for Banks in southwestern Sydney.
Kate Cheney, member for Curtin in Western Australia and near Perth.
Joanne Ryan, member for Lawler, Melbourne.
Good morning, I'm Renee Coffey. I'm the member for Griffith up in Brisbane.
Thank you, colleagues. So I now do we have Trace? Trace is still.
Good morning, Tracy Rose from Pearce, Western Australia.
Thank you, Tracy. I now welcome representatives from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to give evidence. For the benefit of Hansard, if you'll please state your full name and the capacity in which you're appearing before the committee.
Chair, thank you. It's Lauren Bain, First Assistant Secretary, Southeast Asia Maritime Division at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, here today representing the Office of Southeast Asia. If, with your permission, Chair, I might ask the colleagues at the table to introduce themselves so that you know who we've got in the room. Is that okay? Thank you.
Gary Cowan, I'm the CEO of the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations.
Fiona Hogarth, I'm head of the ASEAN Australia Centre.
Cal McGuirk, Acting CEO of the Centre for Australia-India Relations.
Joshua House, Director of the New Colombo Plan Secretariat.
Kirsty McNeil, Executive Director of the Diplomatic Academy.
Thank you, witnesses. This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and has the same standing as proceedings of the House. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of the Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Do you wish to make an opening statement before we proceed to discussion?
Yes, Chair, I do. So I'll proceed with that, with your permission.
Please.
The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, welcomes the opportunity to appear before this committee on this important inquiry. Building Australia's Asia capability is key to Australia realising and taking advantage of the strategic and economic opportunities in the Indo-Pacific region. Australia's national interests demand that we engage our region more deeply. Our security, prosperity and economic future are intrinsically tied to the region. Australia's engagement with Asia in particular is wide-ranging and growing, underpinned by foreign policy, national security, business, education, tourism and people-to-people cooperation. To enable Australia to take full advantage of the emerging economic opportunities in Asia, to manage our national security interests, to strengthen ties between our peoples and institutions, DFAT recognises the importance of Australia developing national Asia capability, particularly in the context of declining Asian language learning. Growing global economic weight continues to shift to the Indo-Pacific. 4 of Australia's top 5 trading partners, China, Japan, the Republic of Korea and India, are in Asia. China is Australia's largest trading partner, Japan has long been a major trading partner, and our trade with the Republic of Korea is substantial and growing. There are significant economic opportunities in South Asia, particularly India, which is the world's fastest growing major economy and projected to be the 3rd largest by 2030. As a region, Southeast Asia is our largest trading partner and projected to become the world's 4th largest economy by 2040. In this context, Asia-capable leaders are pivotal in facilitating trade and investment links. Chair, invested Australia's Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040 identified Southeast Asia literacy as a critical enabler to realise the breadth of opportunities in Southeast Asia. And the government's new roadmap for Australia's economic engagement with India outlined initiatives to increase India literacy within the Australian business community. Greater Asia capability, including investment in language skills, would promote deeper people-to-people and education cooperation, including opportunities for more Australians to connect with the region through work and study. Chair, developing critical Asia capability underpins Australia's broader strategic interests as well. A deepened investment in Asia capability would inform and benefit our engagement with bilateral and regional partners and position us well among like-minded partners at a time of geostrategic competition in the Indo-Pacific. Asia capability, including through language proficiency, supports DFAT's pursuit of Australia's strategic interests. DFAT as an agency has benefited over many decades by being able to recruit staff with pre-existing Asia capability and has further invested by providing language training in 14 Asian languages. Language and cultural skills have been key ingredients in the delivery of successful Australian statecraft over many decades and will only increase in importance as we deepen our ties with the region. Chair, Australia's identity as a successful multicultural society contributes to our strategic weight and our international influence, as government has made very clear. Investing in multilingualism as a national asset would complement the government's projection of our modern, inclusive identity to the region and as a welcoming country to prospective migrants. Through DFAT's bilateral and regional engagement, through its foundations, councils and institutes, its programs to promote intercultural understanding, build business and people-to-people links, and its reformed New Colombo Plan, DFAT is contributing to Australia's efforts to build Asia capability, and further detail about these initiatives is outlined in DFAT's submission of the 7th of November. Finally, DFAT recognises that building Asia capability is a long-term agenda requiring sustained national effort, policy consistency and resourcing, and a high degree of collaboration between federal, state and territory governments, the education sector and business. And DFAT welcomes the opportunity to contribute to any domestic-led process to advance this agenda. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that opening statement. I might exercise my prerogative as the chair to open with a few questions. So clearly DFAT is on the front lines of Australia's engagement with our region, and one of the primary end users of Australia's Asia capability, if you'd like. You're in the rooms negotiating the trade agreements, the investment deals, the security cooperation agreements, delivering the capacity building programs throughout the region. So I want to begin by better understanding the role of Asia capability in DFAT's day-to-day work. Your submission makes clear the connection between the decline in Asia literacy across Australia's society and that decline undermining our strategic and foreign policy objectives and diminishing our ability to deepen Australia's economic engagement with the region. So what kinds of Asia capabilities does Australia need to support the achievement of our economic, security and foreign policy objectives? What kind of Asia literacy do we need to see broadly across Australian society? And what kinds of deeper Asia capabilities do we need to see in Australians working in roles facing the region?
Thank you, Chair. There's a lot in that question, and it's a question dear to my heart. So maybe if I can start by talking a little bit as a division head within DFAT facing Southeast Asia and advancing our interests there, and about how we harness Asia and grow Asia capability within the division, within the Office of Southeast Asia, and I know others will want to add to this as well. So in terms of capabilities that we harness already, obviously language skills are a core element of that. My colleague Kirsty McNeil from the Diplomatic Academy might wish to speak in a little bit more detail about how DFAT develops those language skills of our staff, particularly those who are posted to roles in our international network. Advancing our interests in the region, Chair, of course, is driven to a large degree by the work of our embassies and high commissions in the region, and language and cultural capability is essential to how they operate and get things done whether it be in the economic sphere or indeed on security matters or development programs. I think DFAT takes really seriously the broader capability challenge, which is about equipping our workforce to be able to deal with, with cultural sensitivity with the countries in which and with which we work. Certainly, the way in which we advance our development program as partnership with the countries that we work with, those cultural and language capabilities are absolutely critical. So we do put a lot of effort into building those capabilities with DFAT. Of course, it's not just language capabilities. There are broader trends and nuances to do with our region, which we develop skills in. So, for example, there's been a lot of focus on building Indo-Pacific capability. We do work in a number of instances with institutions like the National Security College to ensure that our staff have access to the best expertise to help build their capabilities to be able to progress our interests. I know that there are some specific capabilities that we look at through the various institutes, and colleagues here can speak to those as well. Mr. Cowan.
Okay, yes, thank you. I work on the China relationship through the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations. I think I'd answer your question by saying, the challenge that Australian society faces as a whole is kind of the same one that DFAT faces, and certainly when we look at China, we need two kinds of capability. There's a kind of capability that's deep expertise, and that encompasses, really strong mastery of the language, understanding of the politics, the economic structure, conditions in the country and the like. Time in country, significant time in country, because that's essential for understanding, making links, knowing the language, but also being able to make judgments on the drivers that country faces and opportunities. And then the ability to kind of stitch that together into other areas of policy. So that's what we might call deep expertise. And we certainly need that on many countries, but certainly we need that on China. We need that for people who are making policy decisions on our relationship and China's broader posture across the region in DFAT and beyond. There's another kind of capability which is broader literacy. Even people who are not working on China in DFAT need a good understanding of, the way that China's operating in the world and how we might respond to that. And I think we would argue that we need that, much more broadly across Australian society, so business can make accurate decisions, risk-informed decisions about engagement. Academia can do the same. Government, of course, arts institutions. So that's a kind of a broader literacy piece that we need our schools to be producing, our universities to be producing, and to be embedded in boardrooms and senior executives and the like. So the programs that the foundation does tries to make contributions to both those kinds of capability.
Well, thank you. So when I look at the CVs of many of our senior diplomats who are working in the region, providing advice on the region, I see a lot of rungs on their career ladder that they've climbed to get to their current positions that no longer exist. So, for example, initial exposure to Asia at primary school, secondary school programs through the curriculum there, degrees in Asia Studies programs that no longer exist or only exist in a much stripped back form, language degrees or diplomas in programs that are no longer offered or being offered or undertaken at a fraction of the scale by far fewer numbers of students, scholarship programs for academic study in the region. What are the implications of the decline of the teaching of Asian studies and Asian languages at Australian schools and universities for DFAT? What does that mean for you in building that pipeline of deep expertise that you rely on?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's an important question, and with your indulgence, if I could just perhaps add a little of my personal background. I studied Indonesian at high school. It was offered at my local high school. I then went on to study it at university. I came back and did a PhD, was able to do some internships in Indonesia, so I had quite lengthy in-country experience, and now 20 years later, I'm heading the division that looks after Indonesia. So I will just use that as one personal example of how that Asia capability has been a critical building block for my career, but also to further Australia's engagement with a critical partner, Indonesia. Sorry, that's a little bit self-indulgent, but I do feel that's an example of what your question is going to. I think certainly from where I sit, as we spoke about earlier, my division in advancing our interests with Southeast Asia really does thrive on having a pool of Asia literature and particularly Indonesia capable staff. The question that you ask goes to what are the future prospects for that pool of staff going forward with the declining teaching of Asian languages in our schools and universities, and obviously from my perspective it is a very detrimental trajectory. I think clearly there are other agencies and other witnesses who I'm sure have given you the statistics in terms of the decline of particular language groups, and I think that is a critical decline in capability for our national interests. Thank you. Others might wish to add. Did you want?
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, I have a similar personal story to share in that being an Indonesianist has been a key factor in my professional and personal life and an abiding joy, and part of the reason that I'm so pleased to be representing the ASEAN Australia Centre and Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade today is because it's such an important issue that the committee is addressing for Australia. The ASEAN Australia Centre looks after the 11 countries of Southeast Asia, and we have 4 pillars. The first pillar is the cross-cutting enabling pillar, Southeast Asia literacy, and the other 3 pillars are economic, education, community and cultural links. And that Southeast Asia literacy in our case, because we're dealing with 11 countries, it means that the approach that we take, while I personally and many of us, we do need that deep expertise that Gary was talking about, but we apply the Southeast Asia literacy from classrooms to boardrooms, kind of making sure that there is a familiarity with Southeast Asia and a sense of the importance of Southeast Asia to Australia's prosperity and security to our future. And that means that we have programs with schools. We have 58 schools in our ASEAN Australia Bridge Partnership program, and that's about giving young people at a school age a sense of Southeast Asia. I think the scale of Southeast Asia means it's very difficult for us to be able to deliver or to work on the deep expertise side of things, and that's something that is, we need lots of partners. It's a national effort that we need to deliver.
Can I just drill down on that and ask a kind of a pointed question? What would be the implications for Australian foreign policy if Indonesian studies was no longer taught at Australian schools or universities?
Thank you, Chair. I think that would have a very detrimental impact on Australia's ability to progress our interests with our near neighbour. Clearly, we need these capabilities. There are capabilities that DFAT can certainly grow without that basis of school and university education, but it's a lot harder. And when we talk about the personal pathways that people have been through, often when they're coming into the department with these skills, they're pre-existing. Certainly, there are languages that we train people in DFAT where there is no high school education, and Ms McNeil might wish to speak further to that. But I think having no Indonesian taught at schools and universities would be very detrimental to our ability to prosecute our interests with one of our closest partners. Thanks.
And would there be bilateral implications for that?
I think it would just make us a less effective and less influential partner, really. Would Indonesia, obviously having a good level of Indonesia capability within Australia has been a strength of our national personality over many decades, and something that we should be very proud of. We have many of the leading, world-leading academics focusing on Indonesia in our universities here in Australia, but with the decline of Indonesian language availability, there is a grave risk that future generations of those experts won't exist. Ms McNeil, did you want to add?
Sure. I guess more broadly, the department recruits for a broad range of capabilities. So I just wanted to flag we've got some very experienced colleagues here with deep Southeast Asia expertise and North Asia expertise, but just to flag that we do recruit across a broad range of capabilities in the department. And cultural adaptability is one of them. Our focus on language and Asian capability within the Diplomatic Academy is quite clear. We teach 28 languages all up, and 14 of them are from Asian languages. We have 372 positions in our network which we consider to be language designated positions which require the language to do the job, and 205 of those are Asian positions. So there is definitely a reflection within our own focus within the Academy on ensuring Asian capability in that sense.
I've just realised I've been, for members who aren't in the group chat, you just engage with the Secretariat about joining that so I can share the call around. But just drilling down on that one question, the language designated roles, could we get AI to do that? You know, is AI the solution to language capability in diplomacy?
Well, I'm sure there are many ways we can use AI in the work that we do. Will it replace the personal relationships that diplomats and diplomacy brings? My personal view is no, but there are certainly tools and uses for AI throughout our whole learning and development pathways, which I look forward to be able to really embrace and look at ways to make our language training better and bigger. But no, I don't think it would replace the need to have language training.
Could I just add one point on that?
Yeah, please. So if you want to go to the constraints and limitations of the use of AI for diplomatic practice.
Yeah, look, just to say that, it's true for Chinese, but I'm sure it's true for almost every language that, number one, learning the language shows that you're serious about that country. So it makes an impact on the other side, that you've taken the time and effort to learn that. Also, the time spent doing a language also means you're investing in that other country's culture, the setup of its society, economy, politics and all of that. So it provides a form of assurance that you've understood that other country to a much deeper degree. So I don't think you can replace that with AI or any other kind of technical tool of that sort. That it's of a different nature.
If I may add, Chair, I think, just speaking as an Indonesian speaker, many of the AI translation models, they get you to a certain point, but they're not going to capture that cultural nuance and idiomatic language really very particularly effectively. So I do think, as Mr Cowan was saying, taking the time to learn a language and really speak it and develop those cultural awarenesses and the awarenesses of idiomatic language and how you use that in particular cultural context is not something that you can replicate, I don't think, with AI, although the technology clearly does have potential to help us and to be a tool that we can use into the future.
It might not help you to see the prawn behind the rock.
Yeah, correct, exactly that. Yeah.
Mr Soon, well, actually, sorry, I'm conscious, Mr Burrell and Ms Cheney, that you're not on the chat as well. If you want to jump in.
Is that a WhatsApp chat, Chair?
There might be a signal group. If you could share your details with the Secretariat, we'll get going.
Thanks. Okay. So is it my turn?
Go for it, mate. Yep.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Good to hear that we might need humans a little bit into the future in diplomacy. I think that's probably a good thing.
No robot could replace you, mate.
Yeah. A couple of things that I wanted to ask, and the chair has covered off on some good points about language. True immersion for anyone, particularly young people, comes from being in another culture. So whilst there's an expense and there's logistical issues with getting as many Indonesian studying Australian young people to Indonesia or wherever else in South Asia or Asia, do you see a further role for the government to assist in that happening?
Thank you for that question, and I strongly agree. Immersion is a critical part of building this capability, and certainly we're doing or trying to build those immersion opportunities, including through the New Colombo Plan and a number of programs that our foundations and institutes run. I might ask my colleague, Mr House, to speak specifically to the New Colombo Plan and recent reforms which have really been made, and I know the committee chair has been deeply involved in that as well, with trying to create opportunities for deeper and longer immersion to really boost the capability benefits from that program.
Thank you. And I'll just add that in July, the Foreign Minister announced the second phase of the New Colombo Plan, which is really about building a larger cohort of young Australians with deeper Asia expertise. And as part of that, we're scaling up the size of the scholarships program from 150 participants per year to about 500 by 2028. So that will create that larger cohort of Australians with deeper Indo-Pacific capability. We've introduced a new NCP semester program, which is designed to leverage Australian universities' reciprocal exchange programs with counterparts in the region, and we're hoping to get about 1,200 participants through that program a year. We've created a language learning target of 15% for the program for 2026, and that will scale up to 25% by 2028. And that's really to boost the study of priority Asian languages under the program. We've also increased engagement for Australian transnational education presences in the region, so allowing NCP programs to be undertaken at Australian offshore campuses in the region. And we're providing additional program support to Australian universities to build out their Indo-Pacific course offerings. So all of that very much goes to encouraging younger Australians to undertake longer-term, more immersive experiences in the region.
And what are the results that we're seeing so far? I mean, I know we're in early days, but what are we seeing? Yeah, so we're in the sort of final phases of finalising our 2026 rounds, and we're hoping to have outcomes announced very shortly on that.
And
excellent.
Vice Chair, if I may, just on the China front, the National Foundation, is concerned by the trends that you've been discussing as a committee, and partly as a result of that, to kind of try to reinforce the pipeline. We're building on the New Colombo Plan reforms, and New Colombo Plan is for undergraduate students. The foundation is sponsoring 65 scholarships in country long term in China over the next 4 years. So it builds on that effort and tries to address the kind of issue you're talking about.
And I note that there's the Bridge School Partnerships. Is that focused on, particularly from our perspective, getting Australian secondary school students who are studying Indonesian language and studies to Indonesia or to other ASEAN countries?
Yes. So the Bridge School Partnership Program, there's a component of it that is Indonesia focused, and there is also a broader ASEAN program as well. Really, that is about linkages between schools. I don't know the breakdown between primary schools and high schools actually in that program, but it has been a really long-standing and terrific program that has boosted exchange between Australian school students and their counterparts in the region. It's it's not always offering, and in most cases I don't think it's an immersion experience as such, but it does provide those linkages between school communities, which often schools choose to follow up on and engage on in-person exchanges as well. A lot of it is virtual and that works really well. So schools are partnered with schools in the region and treat that as part of their core curriculum. Ms Hogarth might want to speak further to that.
Vice Chair, it's very much it's a program that aims to kind of encourage interest in Southeast Asia at primary school and secondary level rather than the immersion model. So it's more about developing a relationship between, and particularly in schools that may not have, outside Melbourne and Sydney, for example, that may not have much engagement with Southeast Asia or the opportunities, particularly for the teachers, those professional development opportunities. So it links up the schools directly with a partner in Indonesia or in other parts of Southeast Asia so that they can have a richer educational experience for the students, but it doesn't provide an immersion, although there is a component where the teachers from the partner schools visit each other's schools, but it's not for long periods. So
okay,
it's about...
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. I was just going to say, so it's more about reaching a large groups of students and communities and schools than an in-depth experience.
So I suppose my overall question is, given that I think we all agree immersion's important, is there some sort of pathway where secondary students who are studying and showing great potential in Indonesian language and Indonesian studies, but who might not be able to, their parents might not be able to afford to have them participate in any immersion programs where they visit Indonesia or any other ASEAN programs, is there any pathway to assist those students or those schools for an exchange or for them to travel to Southeast Asia whilst they're still at secondary school?
Deputy Chair, it's a good question. I do think while the new Colombo plan deals very well with that undergraduate cohort, certainly to my mind, there probably aren't any specific programs that assist with that school age cohort. You're right, it is one type of incentive that could be looked at as part of a suite of options to increase opportunities for students if resources were available. Current resources, of course, don't support that, but it is something that I think that would probably greatly enrich many students should it be something that government wanted to pursue.
Thank you. I'm aware of time. I just had one more thing I wanted to raise, but very briefly because I want my colleagues to be able to ask some questions, and that is in relation to, Australia being Asia ready has involved us understanding understanding Asia better, but it's also projecting our cultural ideas or our culture into Asia, and that was done through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s with Radio Australia's shortwave broadcasting, and now it's done with the ABC and digital. Do you see a continuing role for that and to maybe even enhance that so that we can encourage that knowledge of Australia, what Australia is, and increase our influence in those nations?
Deputy Chair, certainly, though you're right, Radio Australia and also the Australia Network, ABC, not sure what it's called now, ABC International, have been effective tools to as you say, to project Australian cultural content, but also our views and sort of personality in the region. I can't comment in detail on future prospects for the ABC's international work. Sorry, it's outside of my current remit, but happy to take that on notice and come back to you if you would like.
Yeah, thank you very much. No more questions from me, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. We have questions from Ms Coffey, Mr Soon and Ms Chaney. I recognise we have 10 minutes left, so I propose that we get all of those questions en bloc and put them to the committee together. Ms Chaney?
Thank you. You mentioned you've got 372 positions that require language. You teach 28 languages in the Diplomatic Academy. I imagine not all those languages are taught in Australian high schools, and I'm interested in what the different investment is required if you're teaching a language from scratch in the academy versus someone who has a high school background in that language.
Ms. Coffey.
I wanted to thank the witnesses who in particular shared about their own personal journeys, given where they are now and the roles that they're doing for our nation. I'm very thankful they shared that. My question was, you know, a number of you talked about kind of how you developed your interest and your learning, you know, the study, the expertise, but a couple of you did mention kind of a passion for this area. And I think, Ms. Hogarth, you even mentioned a joy or something similar. My question is just around above and beyond the learning and the study, how do we foster that passion in this area for our young people?
Thank you. Mr. Sain.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to my former colleagues at the department and for your great work in the region as well. My questions, there are two of them. They're institutional ones and really touch on the topics you mentioned before. One is, has there been consideration given specifically in the recruitment processes at the department to say, look, if you have these Asia-specific priority languages, you will be highly prioritised in recruitment process? Because, look, I understand there is implicitly those, but just to send a market signal, is that something that has been considered? And the second one is within the department, you've mentioned obviously language training associated with overseas postings, as well as some specific initiatives regarding China capability that people outside the China areas might be able to attend. But has the department considered broader language training? I know there's cost implications about it, unrelated to postings, or at least unrelated to an imminent posting, so that capability can continue to be developed and built in the institution.
Well, thank you. If witnesses want to respond to those in kind, I have one final question at the end that I'll add in on China.
Great. Perhaps we'll just go through the questions in the order that they were asked. Perhaps Ms McNeil might speak to Ms Cheney's question about the difference between training people with high school language experience and those who do not have that experience.
Thanks, Dr. Payne. We always appreciate when people come to us in the Diplomatic Academy with a base level of language, any language. It means that if you've got a predisposition to learning a language or you've experienced it before, it's an easier task to acquire a second one or enhance your existing language. Before anyone starts their language training, we assess them on what level they are if they come to us with an existing skill set, and then we'll train them up to the level that we require of them. In certain instances, we look at if someone has already got a good level of language training, we can look at actually lifting them up to like an interpreter, translator level, or we can, so we look at sort of different options. From a return on investment, it's often great if we can then redivert into other language training, which we have also a bunch of positions which are called language desirable. So if we can afford it, then we can divert that. So I guess that, you know, if we recruit people or can get people in with existing language skills, then we can use that available resources to further enhance language more broadly in the department. But perhaps I'll talk about recruitment a little bit more after.
Great. Thank you. Ms Coffey's question, excellent question about the passion and the joy of learning languages. I might just have a stab at answering that. A really great question. And I think one of the things about encouraging young people to study languages is, I think, instilling that sense of joy and really reward, I suppose, at a personal level from gaining that language skill. Learning a language is not an easy thing, right? So what we're asking our students to do is really to commit to that often over a large number of years. It's time consuming. Sometimes a language subject is considered to be harder and require more effort in a sustained way than some other subjects that students might have the opportunity likely to pursue. So I strongly agree, actually, having perhaps it's language mentors or some sort of program which can really help young generation Australians understand the benefits of language learning, perhaps in this instance specifically Asian language learning, and really perhaps programs that can help with the communicating the benefit of that, but also the personal fulfilment that can come from that. Fiona Hogarth might want to add to that.
I just add to that one other aspect of learning a language and having some Asia capability or literacy or understanding or awareness is that it makes you a better Australian, because Australia is such a multicultural country, and so it makes me feel like I'm more engaged and better able to represent Australia when I'm overseas and in any context where I'm representing the department. But it also makes me just in my day-to-day activities a better Australian, because contemporary Australia is such a diverse place. Yeah. We shouldn't be monolingual or not able to engage with other cultures, because we are a multicultural society.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Soons, 2 questions. First one on prioritising recruitment with language skills, and then the second question was around broader language training that DFAT might deliver for the broader cohort, not just those who are going on posting. And maybe if I could just say something on the second question first, and then I'll pass to Ms McNeil. Certainly the department does have a number of offerings that encourage language learning at a range of different stages of career. There are language discussion groups which are facilitated on a weekly basis, which enable staff to sort of keep their hand in and keep their skills fresh. There are also immersion courses which are really valuable for staff with existing language skills. So that there are a number of offerings, I think, that sort of are separate from the posting process. But Ms McNeil might want to speak to the recruitment question.
Thanks, Dr. Bain. Language ability is not a specific recruitment capability or criteria when we recruit. That said, it's obviously something that people on a panel look for and value. And I've got a couple of stats here that might help just give some background to that. We invest a lot in our graduate recruitment, and for example, in 2025, of our 73 graduates, 27 came to us with a self-declared Asian language capability. And similarly, in 2024 of our broader recruitment, about 19% of those we recruited had an Asian capability as well. So it is something we value, but at this point is not a specific criteria for recruitment.
We might have some more questions on notice coming on those stats as well. We've just got a very brief period of time. One very quick question and then one bigger question. The very quick question is, we've discussed the need for like a whole of nation effort for policy consistency and coordination, and indeed that was the first recommendation of the Moore report, a whole of nation plan to strengthen Southeast Asia literacy across business, government, education, training, community. Does the Commonwealth currently have an institutional mechanism for coordinating whole of nation Asia capability efforts?
Thanks for the question, Chair. There is a coordination mechanism for the Moore report, but not specifically for Asia capability.
Is there a mechanism that coordinates with the states?
With the states, not to my knowledge.
Okay. Just on China, so drilling down on that. So the submission notes, obviously, that Australia has a significant interest that requires strong China knowledge capability. Training of Australians in advanced Chinese language is central to our capability to engage China on our own terms, deepen our economic and people-to-people links, and to manage our differences widely. Now, in recent years, the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations has been delivering a series of strategic, innovative and, in my view, high-impact initiatives to build Australia's China capability. I really recognise and applaud that. Acknowledging that the Foundation's advisory board's, I think, first-class submission to this inquiry stated that, quote, it considers that Australia's national China capability currently falls well short of the level required. Specifically, it identifies what Mr. Cowan was talking earlier, the need for deep expertise built on mastery of the Chinese language, significant experience living and working in China, the ability to integrate expert knowledge of China into a broader context of Australian interests. Now, in that context, a number of...
I'm sorry to interrupt. We can't hear anything, so we're going to have to come in to the meeting a different way. We'll be back as soon as we can.
So in that context, a number of submissions to this inquiry have flagged an additional challenge being faced by early and mid-career Australians in building their China capability. So a number of submissions note the difficulty of getting China-facing work based in Australian organisations early in their career, and therefore the need to move to China and to work there to develop their China capability, particularly in language. Many then report that upon returning to Australia and seeking government roles, they experience long delays and opaque processes in receiving security clearances. So what they're articulating here is a bit of a catch-22. Our China capability falls short of the level required. We need people to study and work in country, but then individuals can't get jobs requiring security clearances in a timely way back in Australia, or they self-select out of studying in country. Obviously, our security clearance process is essential for our national security, but also our national security requires having a China-capable workforce. How does DFAT think about this challenge? How can we give young Australians wanting to build their China capability and ultimately work in government the certainty they need to plan their careers in a risk-informed way?
Chair, look, thank you very much for that question. There's a fair bit there. There's two big issues.
2 minutes.
two big issues. I'll just deal with the first one very quickly. You pointed to demand, and I think the board of the National Foundation really feels that for a country for whom the China relationship is as important as it is, and the need to understand China is as important as it is, there's a surprising lack of demand from our business sector in this kind of capability. So there needs to be some messaging on that score. But the second thing on the security clearance front, look, and I will just talk maybe generally. These issues apply not only to China but more generally. Number one, we really do want people to spend time in country. It's important for the kinds of reasons we've talked about: deep understanding, language, understanding the driver, judgment, proper judgment about what that country wants, its intentions, its opportunities. So the government, and in particular DFAT, does really value in-country experience. That's very useful and valuable to us. To work in DFAT and other agencies like ours, there is a security clearance process that's important. It goes to, an individual's suitability to protect classified information, resources, activities that they'll need to do in the course of their jobs. And in the course of the security clearance process, trustworthiness, integrity, all those kinds of things are very thoroughly tested. Now, there is in all of that, a factor of a checkable background, what's called a checkable background. That goes to things like the length of time someone has spent overseas, the location where they've been. Are there any uncorroborated gaps in that timeline that just can't be checked? Are there risks that just can't be mitigated? So those things are looked at very carefully. They're all kind of accorded equal weight in that process. It's one of those things that, as you say, at times cuts across, other interests, but has to be protected. I would just say finally that in the programs that we're doing that send students overseas, I've talked about the scholarship programs we're embarking on with students going to China. We do provide a briefing to those students before they go about, a checkable background and things they might do to kind of, adequately protect themselves.
So, a big picture, this context makes Australian government-supported programs and the programs being run by the Foundation significantly more important in that context, I would argue.
Thank you for that endorsement, Chair.
I'd be unsurprised if you didn't agree. Thank you. Well, look, thank you, DFAT, for your attendance today. And on behalf of the committee, some have already expressed it, but let me provide my personal thanks for all you have been doing for building your own Asia capability and for modelling the kinds of careers that are available to young people that take the time and effort to invest in these capabilities. Thank you for the significant contribution you're making to advancing our national interest in complex and consequential times. On that note, you'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence and we'll have an opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. Please send your responses to any questions taken on notice during this hearing to the Secretary by the close of business on Wednesday, 17 December 2025. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I can see we have Melbourne University and I believe Sydney University as well. How are we going with the University of Queensland? Okay, I believe we're in discussion with the Secretary. Given the time, I think we might kick off with the proceedings and hopefully we will return with University of Queensland soon. Oh, they've joined again, I believe. I don't see them up here, but let me begin the proceedings. I now welcome representatives from the University of Sydney, University of Melbourne, and I believe University of Queensland to give evidence. For the benefit of the Hansard, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? I'll exercise my prerogative as a Melbourne MP and invite the University of Melbourne to go first.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Michael, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Global Culture and Engagement here at the University of Melbourne.
And my name's Martine Letts and I'm Group CEO of Asia Link, which is a non-academic department of the University of Melbourne.
University of Sydney.
My name is Kirsten Andrews. I'm the Vice President of External Engagement at the University of Sydney. I'm here with my colleague, Greg.
Greg, I think you're on mute there, mate.
Terribly sorry. We've been having a lot of audio issues. We finally found a machine that lets us hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Greg.
Okay. So good morning. My name is Professor Greg Fox. I'm the Director of the University of Sydney's Southeast Asia Centre.
Okay, and University of Queensland, do you want to have a go at introductions? We can see you on the screen now.
Hi.
Wonderful.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Heather Zwicker from the University of Queensland. I'm the Executive Dean for the Faculty of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences, and I'm with my colleague Greg Hange.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity. I'm Greg Hange, Professor Greg Hange, Head of the School of Languages and Cultures at the University of Queensland.
Well, thank you all. This hearing is a legal proceeding in the Parliament and has the same standing as proceedings of the House. Giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter, may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Now, there are three universities appearing today. Ordinarily, I would invite opening statements. I'm willing to do that, but if, for the interest of questions, if we could keep them quite short, that would be useful. Do people want to make opening statements? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Wesley, Professor, Your Eminence.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for providing the University of Melbourne the opportunity to contribute to this hearing. The university believes that building Australia's Asia capability must be a national priority. Enhanced Asia capability will contribute to economic growth through enhanced trade and commerce links, to stronger diplomatic ties, to making the most of skills and knowledge of our diaspora communities, and to promoting social cohesion. We urge a long-term bipartisan commitment and a coordinated national strategy for building Asia capabilities. This strategy must begin with schools. We recommend long-term strategic investment to increase language study by boosting Asian language teacher training and ensuring students have continuous pathways from primary to high school. State and territory governments might consider adopting the Victorian model of required language education from foundation to year 10. At the university level, there needs to be a government commitment to incentivising domestic student participation in advanced languages and Asian studies, and expanding programs that enable in-country Asian study. We must also sustain and build academic infrastructure, language departments and disciplinary research centres that foster deep area knowledge. Centres of Asia capability such as AsiaLink, which the university hosts, are key national strengths. A non-academic department established in 1990, AsiaLink builds Australia's Asia capabilities by developing the knowledge, skills and connections that enable Australians and businesses to engage confidently and effectively with the region. At the recent event to mark the 30th anniversary of the AsiaLink Leaders Program, the Minister for Industry and Innovation and Minister for Science, the Honourable Tim Ayres, referred to AsiaLink as a cornerstone of how Australia engages in the region in which we live. I very much agree with the Minister. Beyond specific investments, we should also be working to ensure whole-of-government policy alignment and remediating policies that create barriers. For example, although under the Job Ready Graduates package, the student contribution for languages is relatively low, languages are most commonly taken as part of humanities, arts and social sciences degrees, which have a high student contribution rate. We need a united effort across universities, government and business to drive a policy delivering Asia capability for Australia. We are keen to play our part. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, University of Melbourne. University of Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Noting that your request to be quick, I'll just say the version we've given the Hansard will be slightly longer than the version I'm about to give you. So I've just made some quick edits, but thank you for the opportunity to speak and to do so remotely. I'm joined today by Professor Greg Fox, the Director of the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre and a Professor of Respiratory Medicine. Greg will be able to speak to much of our research impact and partnerships across the region. And I believe you're hearing next week from our colleague, Professor Michelle Ford, a Professor of Southeast Asian Studies and Deputy Head of Language School. And I thank both of them and our colleagues with specific Asian expertise for their contribution to the university's submission. We're indeed fortunate to have them all advising us on this. So today, the University of Sydney, 175 years old and 100 years of Asian engagement, hosts thousands of students and scholars from across the region, undertaking research from the grounds of Angkor Wat to hospital clinics in Hanoi, while sustaining 130 partnerships in 20 nations. We operate strong language and culture schools, delivering programs in Chinese, Indonesian, Japanese, Korean and Sanskrit, alongside multidisciplinary research centres focused on China and Southeast Asia. We're deeply committed to ensuring access and equity in Asian engagement through programs such as the New Colombo Plan and Australia Awards. And in 2024, we launched a program of Sydney International Equity Scholarships for students from low socioeconomic and government marginalised backgrounds. And they've brought about 21 scholars to the university, and there will be 5 more joining us this week. These kinds of initiatives broaden participation and strengthen cultural literacy, make our Australian classrooms more diverse and create pathways for leaders. Between 2022 and 2025, our researchers have co-authored more than 12,800 publications with Asian partners, primarily in medicine, engineering and computer science. And over the last decade, the university has invested nearly $100 million in regional projects and built networks that advance shared priorities such as public health, sustainability and innovation. The work that Professor Fox leads, that I'm sure we'll get into, is a classic example. Through his team's clinical trials in Vietnam, they've been able to halve the rate of drug-resistant TB in people at high risk for this condition, and their findings have been adopted by the World Health Organization. It's an evidence of real-world capability. We believe that universities, and my colleagues on the panel here, are a foundation for much of this capability, producing graduates with linguistic proficiency and cultural literacy, and driving research that informs policy and business strategy. We're happy to talk about our specific suggestions.
Thank you. University of Queensland.
Similar to the University of Sydney, we will have submitted a longer version, and this is an edited one. Asia capability is not simply an educational aspiration, it's a sovereign capability essential to Australia's security, prosperity, and diplomatic influence in the region that will most influence our future. And yet, by every measure imaginable, we are becoming less capable rather than more. How did we get here? 3 factors stand out. First, policy instability. Second, structural disincentives, and we'd echo the University of Melbourne's reference of job-ready graduates, as well as some disincentives in ATAR scaling for students. And third, a governance gap, whereby education is primarily a state responsibility, while foreign policy and trade are federal. So what's to be done? Our submission outlines 7 recommendations, but I'll just highlight 3 of them here. First, we need a coordinated national framework endorsed by state and territory education ministers that treats Asia capability as the sovereign priority it is. This must connect schools, university, and governments in a sustained long-term effort. Second, the Australian Tertiary Education Commission's University Compacts should explicitly recognise Asian literacy as a national priority, with incentives not only for institutions that maintain programs, but for those that extend access to students at universities where such programs no longer exist. And third, we recommend establishing an expert reference group to provide evidence-based advice on language policy, pedagogy in the age of AI, and strategies to rebuild capability. I want to offer a quick note on generative AI. Some will note that generative AI renders language learning obsolete, that machine translation will just do the work for us. This is dangerously mistaken. AI cannot navigate the cultural nuance required in sensitive diplomatic or commercial contexts. It cannot build the trust that comes from demonstrating respect through language. And as AI becomes more prevalent, the humans who verify, contextualize, and apply its outputs will need more sophisticated linguistic and cultural knowledge rather than less. Universities like UQ, the University of Melbourne, the University of Sydney are doing what we can, but individual institutional effort can't substitute for national coordination. So we're extremely keen to know about this hearing and to participate in it.
Well, thank you all, and particular thanks for taking my note on brevity. I can assure you that I've digested all of your submissions, your written submissions to the inquiry at length, and acknowledge the thought and effort that has gone into them. Can I start with a big picture question? So the submissions in each of your university submissions articulate well the value of Australian universities in building Asian capability in Australia, both in training new generations of graduates with Asian expertise, but also in building and sustaining the depth of expertise and of academic knowledge of Asia in Australia. They also articulate the decline of enrolments in Asian languages and area studies programs and the challenges of sustaining these programs in the face of persistently low student demand. Can I begin by asking, on current trajectories, what would Asian language studies and Asian area studies look like at Australian universities in a decade's time? Are we facing an existential crisis for Asian language studies and broader Asian area studies programs at Australian universities? Melbourne University?
Could I start, Chair? Look, it's a very good question. I think that really there are two sides to this. There's a demand side and a supply side. I think, and the two are intimately linked. What we've seen is the gradual reduction in the teaching of Asian studies and Asian languages across the university sector because the demand side has started to, well, it's been in decline for a long time. There are a number of things here that I think are important to acknowledge. Let me just quickly go through a few. The first one is from the student perspective. I think it's not particularly clear what the benefits are for someone to make the enormous investment that is required into studying a foreign language, particularly some of the more difficult Asian languages. Originally in the 1990s, the argument was made that there would be career and economic benefits. And I don't think it was clear that those were delivered on for people who made the investment in languages. So I think we have a collective national challenge to talk to students and young people about why it is important for them individually, personally, to invest in learning an Asian language and Asian skills as well. I also think that there are other issues to do with the increasing competitiveness of university degrees. So, for example, both of my sons, if I could use a personal example, did Indonesian up until year 12. I had desperately hoped that they would do Indonesian at university. Neither of them did because it was seen as too time expensive and too difficult, and it would bring down their weighted average mark, which would make them sort of uncompetitive for postgraduate courses. So I think universities have got some work to do to think about incentivising or removing the disincentives to language studies as well. I'll leave my remarks there, Chair.
Thank you. Sydney, Queensland, what's this look like in 10 years' time? Is this an existential challenge?
Chair, I've been trying to do some quick maths and I'm not sure my maths is good enough to answer that question with specificity, but the decline among domestic enrolments is indeed alarming. And that's why we've put forward some of these suggestions. I'd agree. I think the University of Sydney would agree with everything Professor Wesley has said. Also looking at what that school to university transition is like. We've just heard from the personal example. We see the decline in enrolments at the school level creating that demand problem at the tertiary level, and we'd suggest our proposal talks about specifically incentives for schools to maintain or their high quality Asian language programs, so the pool is there for us to recruit. It may not have worked for Professor Wesley's family, but I think if we think through what those options look like, and then also to think through the scholarships and the rewards appropriately to make sure that the talent is there. We've also talked about things like Asia capability scholarships, long-term investments to understand that signalling, and I only heard the latter half of the DFAT evidence given earlier, but that sort of long-term signalling from government that was the focus of your last round of questioning would be critical for young people to understand that those skills are indeed valued by government and that there are long-term career options available for them.
I can see that EUQ is itching to jump in, but I've just put one quote from Sydney's University to you. So the Sydney University submission says, despite their enormous strategic importance, Indonesian, Thai or Vietnamese studies programs do not and may never generate tuition revenues sufficient to sustain quality programs, even in major metropolitan universities. Market logic ensures these programs will continue closing unless government intervenes decisively. Is it, in your view, is it correct to say that in a purely demand-driven higher education system, Indonesian studies would not exist at Australian universities?
I'd defer a more specific answer to that to Professor Ford when you speak to her, but I believe yes is the answer. If we were to now we teach lots of things that do not operate solely on a market objective. So I just want to be clear that we're not threatening to close those programs, and I don't want to be alarmist about that. But it is true that we are not. That the market logic doesn't occur and the demand doesn't occur. If that was our sole frame for deciding what to teach, those programs would be at risk.
Sorry, University of Queensland, you've been itching to get in.
Many thanks for the question. It is a good question. I might tackle it a little bit differently. I think everything that has been suggested in relation to the existential threat is real for some of the languages such as those, especially Bahasa Indonesia, as already mentioned, and some of the other ones that we don't actually teach at our university. I think our other Asian languages will probably still look sustainable given our current trends. We have seen some declines, but certainly we're not at a critical level with those yet. So that's a good news story. The other good news story is that I think that in spite of the fact that Indonesia has been a worry and a concern right across the country for a long time now, I do think that with a change of approach, there are ways that we can build better sustainability. So at the University of Queensland, we've started to create some dual degree programs with our Diploma of Languages, which brings much more visibility to the diploma than was previously the case. And when we're going out and talking to students in high schools, they're very aware of this now, that they can see it through the admissions centre and have lots and lots of questions about it. We've also established the Brisbane University's Languages Alliance, and we're currently thinking of ways that we may be able to get more students enrolling through that alliance of the 3 South East Queensland primary universities by thinking about some kind of multi-institutional or standalone diploma, because currently, let's say for a student at QUT, there's very little incentive for that to be marketed to them because they would have to cannibalise some load out of their own degree program. So if we can think of ways to bolt languages onto degree programs, even at universities where there are no languages offered, I think there are potential solutions and ways that we can work together to turn this around, because I think the existential threat is absolutely real if we don't.
Thank you. I have bits of questions from Mr. Soon and Ms. Cheney. Mr. Burrell, do you want to jump in as Deputy Chair?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just want to, a couple of comments from the University of Melbourne about the mandated languages from foundation to year 10, and that being a positive thing in Victoria, and I don't disagree with that. And then the comment from the University of Sydney saying that Asian studies and languages programs do not attract sufficient demand from Australian students to remain financially viable. Universities have little influence over this demand. I suppose what I'm asking is, what does influence the demand, and how can we get, and to the University of Melbourne's comment, I agree, but language, interest in languages falls, in my experience, falls fairly sharply after year 10. So what can we do to influence the demand, i.e. to make students very interested in continuing languages after year 10 and then into university? What can we do to create that demand?
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Let me take a stab at it, and by no means is this, the be-all and end-all of the answer, but I actually think that there are some interesting examples in contemporary student demand, which has built very strongly for Korean language studies at the University of Melbourne, but also, I understand, at other universities that are appearing today as well. And it's quite interesting that really student demand for Korean language learning has tracked the rise of K-pop and the Korean film and television industry as significant areas of student interest. And so I think there's a very clear link between student interest and demand for learning particular languages and learning about particular cultures. I think we can use that as an example of what we can do elsewhere. My sense is that if I was to wave a magic wand, I would be, in order to build demand for Indonesian language, for instance, I would be incentivising schools to take students to Indonesia to have them experience the fascination and the richness of Indonesian culture. And I think we would see the continuation of demand to continue with Indonesian in those sort of circumstances. So that would be my initial response to your question, Deputy Chair.
And have them experience Indonesia's version of Gangnam Style.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you. And does the University of Sydney, just in your view of the or UQ, the demand, what would increase the demand?
I might jump in if I may. I absolutely agree with what's just been said by my colleague at the University of Melbourne, but I think that only captures part of the potential market. What we've been trying to do is to think far more deliberately about the specific kinds of capabilities that are required in Australia and articulate why they're important, but also the very specific forms of opportunities that lie overseas by partnering with especially countries like Indonesia. So with these dual degrees that we've created, we've done one with our Bachelor of Engineering honours, and I'm going to the civil engineering students and saying, if you're not thinking about doing Indonesian, you're not making very good decisions, because the infrastructure requirements of one of our closest neighbours over the next 50 years are absolutely incredible. We know that we sell an awful lot of heavy plant to Indonesia, but that's the only part of the value chain that we capture. So there is so much more that Australian companies could do if they increase their Asia capability. So we need to be making, I think, very targeted arguments about the very specific economic, diplomatic, trade outcomes that can come from greater linguistic and cultural capability. And at the moment, we're getting ready to replicate a study that was done in the UK that looks at the potential lift of GDP with every percentage point increase in linguistic and cultural capability across the nation. The figures are absolutely staggering, and I think this is becoming even more important as we enter into a very different kind of global economy, and thinking especially about tariffs and such like. We need to operate with the rest of the world very differently, and the time of being able to rely on the extractive economy is quickly approaching its end.
Thank you. We would agree with the comments, particularly about the interesting Korean programs. I think that's a trend we've all seen. K-pop phenomenon has been widespread, and there are lots of students from all over the world who are fascinated in those programs. Just on the supply issue our work in the Sydney Community Languages Teaching Program, which has been supported by the New South Wales Government, has led to around 3,500 students completing that course. And the focus of that particular program has been to keep community languages spoken alive at the local level. I recall it was launched by the then New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian, who of course had spent a lot of time learning her home language and wanted to focus on keeping those areas going. And so we see there's great opportunity in people who are already speaking core Asian languages. How do they become teachers and teach those in the communities to help drive some of that demand? Because students can come and we teach, I'm sure like my colleagues, we teach at either completely beginner level, but also people who may be heritage speaker level through the university courses. And we think there's an opportunity to grow our capability in that space as well.
Thank you.
If I could just add one more point before we move on, from the perspective of the whole sector, I think that work can be done to try and view languages not as being distinct from and bolted onto programs, but closely integrated with the way that universities engage with the complexity of many of the challenges that we face globally today. Just as an example, within my own area of health, understanding the cultural context and the linguistic context of challenges such as tuberculosis or antimicrobial resistance or the next pandemic, all of those require detailed understanding of regional culture and language. And so to be able to provide our undergraduate and our postgraduate students with opportunities to go and explore those issues in the context of Southeast Asia or Asia more broadly, I think provides a relevance which then can create greater demand for language learning. As an example, within the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre, we provide training for academics who are working in the region, which facilitates their research. And ultimately, when they leave the university, if they move on to other industries, they'll bring with them the cultural understanding and the networks that are required. And just to build on the comments that have been made before, I think in order to navigate the complexities of many of the challenges raised in the Moore report in terms of business competence and in terms of ability to address regional issues, we need to be physically in the region, supporting our postgraduate and undergraduate students to be there. And so this means not just through language learning, but also through the other funding schemes, such as through the Department of Foreign Affairs regional support for regional health partnerships, for example, through the NHMRC's funding schemes, through the East Asia Summit and many other schemes to support the whole of sector engagement in the region.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question from Mr. Soon.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues from across the country. I guess I have two questions. The first one touches on your comment, Professor Wesley, about incentives to study languages at the university level. And again, it's something I've heard consistently, informally through friends, colleagues, and actually current students at university. Is there anything being considered about how to potentially address some of those concerns? And equally, I know Ms. Andrews and Professor Fox, you raised a similar thing in your submission at the high school level. Do you have any particular recommendations at either the high school level or the university level to kind of address some of these incentive questions around potential impact on marks, WAMs, ATARs? Because I know, again, informally, it's definitely a consideration that's happening at some scale across the country. The second question that I had was to do with, again, Ms. Andrews and Professor Fox, in your submission, and you touched on it, Ms. Andrews, around touch points in migrant communities. Again, it's something that's come up in the evidence we've heard from different witnesses already about mobilising diaspora kind of communities to support Asian language development. But do you have any kind of like specific ideas about how that might happen? Because I think there has been so far universal recognition that that's an area that has a lot of potential, but hasn't necessarily translated into kind of large scale results. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Soon, for your question. Look, I might just give you a practical example. As part of AsiaLink, we have AsiaLink Education, which has been working for over 30 years now to provide innovative learning materials for Australian schools. So AsiaLink Education works with every state and territory government, as well as the independent school sector, to provide innovative materials for teachers to learn, to use in teaching students about the region in which Australia lives. Some of its more innovative programs are the Bridge programs, which bring together classrooms in Australian states and territories with classrooms in countries like Indonesia, to do joint study, to do joint projects, so that students can get to know each other and learn about each other's cultures. Did you want to?
Yeah, thanks. Just to add to that, so there is an entire set of materials that has been created by AsiaLink Education over the years. One of the problems we find is that if the teachers are not provided with the training to deliver those materials, then they're not used or delivered. So there's a challenge there in terms of providing more support in teacher training to be able to actually deliver the curriculum and the languages. And AsiaLink Education has often made the case in terms of incentives that this is a question not only of professional development for young people and providing continuity from the classroom through to the boardroom. And as we know, there is a break after year 10 often. So that transition point is a disincentive and a problem. But also, it's also a question now of equity for students, that they need to be given the opportunity to be competitive in the international environment and in their careers by having more access to such materials. I'd like to also make a point about the diaspora, if I may, because AsiaLink has worked quite a lot with the diaspora, and we also now have a program which we've been running for the last 7 years called called the Asian Australian Leadership Awards, where we profile the achievements of young Asian Australians across 11 disciplines, which has really partly been addressed to help address the so-called bamboo ceiling, that Asian Australians who are high achievers are not making it into the next levels of executive and non-executive leadership. But I want to cite an example of the fellow who won this year's award as an illustration of what Asian literacy can do for you and what the Asian diaspora does. Dr. Sonu Bhaskar, who is a neurologist, who has managed to patent a couple of innovations in neurology in Germany, but also in Japan. He spent 6 months of his year working in Japan, speaking in Japanese. He told me he speaks 10 languages. I mean, if you wanted to have a shining example of what Asia capability and language learning combined with medicine and health can show you, just look at some of our Asian Australians and their achievements. It's quite remarkable.
There is a question from Ms. Cheney, and then I'm going to come back just to test some of the solutions that were proposed in the submissions as forewarning. Ms. Cheney?
Thanks very much, Chair. And I did want to share yesterday my daughter's Year 9 class spent the day at Curtin Uni, and she came back knowing how to say her name in Korean. So there's something going on there, which no doubt helps. But my question was around how at universities, how explicitly you build Asian capability into non-language courses such as business or other areas where we also need to have those that understanding of Asian culture that will be increasingly relevant.
So I can take that quickly. I know I've actually done a scoping exercise in thinking about the possibility of us standing up an Asian Studies major, and so looked at courses right across the institution where there is some Asia cultural capability or history or thought or business embedded in it, and there certainly are courses quite far across the institution, not so much in the sciences side, but certainly in business, in history, in philosophy, and communication that directly integrate some of that content.
Okay.
If I might give an example, Chair, this is where the new Colombo Plan mobility program is helpful. Just to give an example, the kinds of programs that we have, those students then go and do particular projects. But then there's also other projects like a business school has an Indonesia business and sustainability project of short-term study that 20 students travelled with that. Indonesian inclusive education placements. There's a project that our engineering faculty runs on disaster risk reduction in the Philippines, as well as semester study and exchange. So a combination of the new Colombo Plan plus the study abroad and exchange programs are bedded across all faculties and schools and are, I think, good examples. Could there be more of them? Could we expand them? Potentially, yes, but there are some good examples of high impact and deep engagement across the disciplines there.
Very, very quickly, Ms. Cheney, we at the University of Melbourne have a program called Internationalising Our Curriculum, in which we provide a library of materials for all our academic teachers to use to embed international material in their curriculum and their teaching materials, and we strongly encourage them to do that. And what we've been very gratified by is a very strong uptake, even in subjects in the STEM disciplines, of teachers who are importing or using international and particularly regional comparisons and materials in the material that they teach.
Can I just, if I may, Chair, just make an additional point about schools, because when we talk about curriculum, we're not just talking about language, of course, we're also talking about the teaching of Asian history, culture, political economy, geography. Students tend to study the volcanoes of Europe rather than the ones that are the chain of volcanoes that is in our immediate neighbourhood in Indonesia. So this is a kind of a whole of discipline approach which makes the learning of a language meaningful because it's connected to an understanding of the history, geography, political economy of the region in which we're living.
Thank you.
Okay. As I said, I've got a couple of questions. I want to test some of the proposed solutions that you've outlined in your submission. Firstly, I want to ask about the potential role of the Australian Tertiary Education Commission and the compacts that they could play here. And then I want to ask about some of the proposals in your submissions or the models in your submissions around, essentially I could characterise it as a consolidation of expertise in particular area studies domains at particular universities. So with respect to the Tertiary Education Commission, what role could the Australian Tertiary Education Commission play in building a sustainable Asian languages and area studies sector at Australian universities? I note that UQ's submission proposes that the government acknowledge Asia literacy as a sovereign capability to be advanced by the Australian Tertiary Education Commission's university compacts. Not only should there be incentives for universities with educational offerings and research capabilities in Asia literacy, but there should also be incentives for these institutions to expand the reach of their offerings to students studying at other universities. To do that, it will be necessary to find innovative solutions that enable students to add the study of Asian languages and cultures to their degree programs. So my question is, how could a sustainable Asian languages and area studies sector be promoted in mission-based compacts with Australian universities? And what could the incentives flag in the UQ submission look like?
So I might have a stab at that. And thank you for the question and for picking that up in our submission. Look, I just think the notion of conceptualizing this as a sovereign capability is critically important. The existential threat that you've talked of before could come to pass. And to stop that, we need to recognize why this is important. All of the market forces that we've talked about are still in play. I think with AI, we're at a very funny inflection point at the moment where I think that has precipitated a decline in enrolments. If we look at different forms of technological innovation in the past, I think we're sort of on that downward slope before people realise actually this isn't going to solve everything and it will tick up. But the danger is we lose more while we're at the bottom of that trough. And so I think to recognise that we need a coordinated national system is critical. And I think we're at an ideal moment in terms of timing with ATAC coming online, precisely because this is a body that is stood up to talk about arrangements with universities that extend beyond the life of a single government. And I think this is one of the reasons why this sort of up and down pattern of funding with different governments in the past has contributed to leaving us where we are today.
And what I would like to add to that, if I may, is that it won't just be, I mean, it's difficult to say about, about an institute, ATAC, that hasn't yet been legislated. So we don't know exactly what those compacts will look like. At a narrow view, we would be keen to see incentives for individual universities, but I think realistically, at a broader view, we'd like to see policy settings that allow for collaboration across the sector. And I think that languages could actually be a very useful test case for the government in developing a more joined up tertiary sector. So one of the things that we've talked about here is the value of languages in the TAFE sector. So we know, to take a very concrete example, we know that people lose acquired languages when they experience dementia. And so we would have a lot to do in common with the TAFE sector in providing, primary healthcare workers, aged care workers, potentially disability, NDIS affiliated workers with tertiary language capability. And so I think it's around asking, expecting, hoping that ATAC will provide some policy settings for broader based collaboration rather than just saying, you get to teach languages, you don't get to teach languages, that kind of thing. It's really how we conceive of education across the sector and potentially also with TAFE.
Thank you. Could I just make one additional suggestion in response to that? I think the challenge for legislators as ATEC comes into being and the legislation it gets stood up, the challenge will be to I think it's a great idea to make sure that this kind of national objective is part of what will be those agreements between individual institutions and the sector, and getting that kind of long-term vision of agreed deliverables will be excellent for the sector and the country alike. One of the things, if I could be so bold as to suggest to legislators, that I think we need to watch out for is to make sure that the ATEC has the skills and the resourcing available to do that. We want to make sure that they understand what is needed and in a way to help guide those conversations. I think that's a live watch to make sure that we can bring that into being so that we achieve the ambition outlined by my colleagues from UQ.
Okay. Do you want to add that, Michael? Okay.
Chair, sorry. Look, I endorse everything that's been said. I think ATEC is a real opportunity to have a national approach to Asia capability at our universities. Can I just draw the committee's attention, Chair, to a very interesting paper by an Australian academic currently working in China that documents the scale and the breadth of the Chinese government's investment in area studies. And we'd be more than happy to share that with the committee, Chair.
Is that, Michael, the one that identifies 3 different Australian studies centres in China?
No, it really talks about China's building of area studies capabilities really around on Asian cultures, African cultures, Latin American cultures. It's an enormous investment that's being made across the Chinese education system, and it's the inverse of what's happening across the Western university systems as we disinvest from area studies.
Yes, I've just been told that as an indication of the scale of the investment being made in China at the moment, that there were 3 university-based Australian studies centres in China.
I believe there's more than 3, Chair. I believe there's around 19 Australian studies centres in China.
If I could just add to Michael's comment about China, the issue here too is that specifically this has been elevated now in China as to a project of national strategic significance. So echoing the comments made by our colleagues from the University of Queensland, this has become within China a national strategic priority right across the board.
I just wanted to sort of drill down a little bit into a proposal from Sydney University that is to some extent mirrored by actions that UQ's already taken. So a number of the submissions to this inquiry, not just the submissions of these universities, but more broadly, have argued that sustainability for Asian languages and Asian area studies can only be achieved in Australia through essentially a consolidation of course offerings within specialised, essentially centres of excellence in the university sector. So the Sydney University submission argues for a hub and spoke model for Southeast Asia capability, in which targeted languages and area studies programs for Indonesian would be supported at one metropolitan university in each mainland state and territory, with additional streams for Thai and Vietnamese in Sydney and Melbourne, while support for existing programs at the ANU could also be strengthened. And each of these institutions would be required to have outreach capability to regional universities, and in Victoria's case to Tasmania, through a hub and spoke model. That's the proposal in the Sydney submission. The University of Queensland submission highlights its experience in establishing the Brisbane University's Languages Alliance, which we've already heard of today, with QUT and Griffith University, that pools the teaching of 9 languages across these 3 universities, facilitating a cross-institutional enrolment process. What can we take from past experiences of building hub and spoke style consolidations of languages and area studies programs, and what would be necessary for something like this to succeed, and what do we need to be careful about to ensure that such an approach didn't accelerate an existing decline in student engagement with this field? You can speak to their experience, I think.
Yeah, many thanks, Chair. Look, I think our experience is that it's a really good idea. We do need to understand, though, that the way people choose their university in Australia is very different to some other contexts. So we need to be very careful, I think, about ensuring that this is distributed right across the country in meaningful ways. I think this is where potentially the compacts can come in as well. I think you're absolutely right to signal that this can, and indeed it has in some sectors in the past, I think especially New Zealand, to take one example, actually accelerated the demise of some language programs because people think if we've got these collaborations, it means we don't need to do it anymore and we can just let them do it over there. And that's where I think, thinking about this idea of a sovereign capability and the distribution that you need across the country for this to work well, so that you can have more than just online delivery, which especially for languages can be really problematic. You can think about innovative ways to be complementing that with face-to-face tutorials at different sites. You can think about intensive modes of teaching. There are lots of things I think you can do to make sure that you're delivering the education in a way that the students actually want. And not imagining that we can just do what we had to do in COVID and that will be enough, because I think the experience shows that that's not a good student experience and that's not going to actually pull them in.
And specifically, what about the challenges of getting multiple university bureaucracies to talk to each other on scheduling and on degree structure and on sort of policy consistency? I don't imagine that would be fun. I imagine you've had some experience of it with Bulla. Like, I've heard also suggestions that university students have demonstrated in their past behaviour that they'd be unwilling to even sort of cross the street to another campus to pursue a course offered by another university. What was your experience with Bulla?
Look, it's I'm not going to say it's been without some challenges in that regard, but I think they're surmountable. I think the change of Griffith's timetabling and the way their semesters work, moving to a tri-semester mode of teaching really was very complicated, but we find if students want to actually study these subjects, then they can. But I think that's where different kinds of offerings and intensive need to come into the picture. We need to really understand with a much more student-focused lens how they want to study these areas. If we're saying that they're important and they should, then we need to actually make sure that we're creating a shop where the doors open and they can get in. So intensives is certainly part of it. Hybrid online is absolutely part of it as well. Ideally, with these kinds of collaborations, though, I don't think hybrid is the way to go. I think you would really want to build these collaborations to a critical capacity point where you're able to have bespoke materials that are designed to be delivered online or in intensive mode, where you've got collectively the numbers to make them sustainable rather than just having people zoom into existing classrooms.
University of Sydney, do you want to jump in?
Thank you. Yes, and I just wanted to say firstly that our proposal on the hub and spoke is a particular brainchild of Professor Ford, and I'd urge you to drill into some detail on that work because she's very knowledgeable in this space, so you might want to talk to some specifics with her. But one of the things that it's helpful is that universities can be good and poor collaborators. And my observation is that at the academic level, they're often very good finding people who are expert in their areas, but institutionally we are less good. And the role of ATEC in curating our offerings for national interest, the potential is there, but it needs to genuinely work. The other critical thing, and again, I'd encourage you to talk to Professor Ford about this, is if, for example, in the 2010 reforms, where it was agreed that ANU would continue teaching Hindi and the University of Sydney would no longer teach Hindi, there's discussions, and we still give credit if people want to learn that language there and do a University of Sydney course. Those arrangements have been in place. On one level, that's a good example, but the issue is who holds the Commonwealth supported place, where the funding flows occur in relation to that teaching can encourage universities to be more competitive than they might otherwise be in the national interest. So making sure that the funding flows are generous enough to lead to good behavioural outcomes might be something you might want to talk to her about next week.
Okay, thank you. We're running almost to time, but I can't resist one further question. Your submissions have interestingly grappled with the implications of artificial intelligence or generative AI for language learning and the use in cross-cultural communication. It kind of struck me though, reading your submissions, that it may be in the long term that the biggest impact of generative AI might be in the way that people learn languages rather than in an applied sense in cross-cultural communications. But that sort of led me to the question of, how are Australian universities and high school language curricula preparing Australian students to make use of Asian language skills and area studies expertise in an AI-powered world? And how are Australian teachers and language teachers being enabled, prepared to make use of this in a pedagogical sense? Are we best practice on this? Have we started implementing this? Do we know what best practice is?
If it's okay for me to jump in again first. Look, there's some great work happening. I'd say it's not necessarily very consistent, so it's definitely lumpy in terms of what's happening, but there is definitely some instances of best practice. I know the lead languages teacher at Brisbane State High School has done some really innovative work thinking about modern language pedagogy, given the increasing incidences of mental health concerns with our younger generations and anxiety, and thinking about how actually the language classroom is completely terrifying for some students who have those issues. So how then can we generate almost like generative AI tutors so that they can practice, for instance, oral skills in front of a machine and have some correction and models to follow in a private setting, rather than immediately putting them in front of an entire class or two teachers in an oral examination. So we've got one of my colleagues in Japanese, Associate Professor David Chapman's doing similar work at UQ as well. So there's some really good models, but I think what we need is to understand what best practice looks like and think about ways to replicate that. And again, through a national system, think about pooling resources and as well.
There's nothing at a national curriculum level that would sort of help, your suburban Asian language teacher roll this out to increase the engagement and the effectiveness of their language teaching?
Not that I know of currently, with the exception of some materials that we've created here for Bahasa Indonesia, because one of the problems with the delivery of Bahasa Indonesia is that there are very few pedagogical materials. So we've actually created a website with teaching materials for every year of schooling that is freely available to everybody.
Excellent. Well, regrettably, we are coming up on time. I do feel like we could have had an hour with each of you on each of these topics, but we are not able to accommodate it with everyone's schedules. So thank you for your attendance today. All of you will be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence. You'll have an opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. Please send your responses to any questions taken on notice during this hearing to the Secretariat by the close of business Wednesday, 17 December 2025. The committee will now suspend for a 15-minute break and we will resume at 11 a.m. Thank you all. Well, I now welcome representatives of the Australian National University. For the benefit of Hansard, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Yes, good morning everyone. My name is Matthew Davis. I'm the Associate Dean Education in the ANU College of Asia and the Pacific.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'm Ellie Kent. I'm the Deputy Director of Languages in the School of Culture, History and Language in the College of Asia and Pacific at the ANU.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning. This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. It has the same standing as proceedings of the House. Giving a false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Do you wish to make an opening statement before we proceed to discussion and questions?
Yes, we do.
Please proceed.
So thank you. I'll start and then I'll hand over to Ellie. The ANU College of Asia and the Pacific is a community of multidisciplinary academics, professional staff and technical experts who engage with Asia and the Pacific across disciplinary boundaries and at a variety of levels of analysis. The college offers bachelor degrees in Asian Studies, Pacific Studies, International Security, a Bachelor of Asia-Pacific Affairs, which is a dual degree with Ritsumeikan University in Japan, and a Bachelor of Philosophy. We have a range of master's degrees across areas and disciplines, and of course we also offer doctoral degrees. Our undergraduate offerings especially also include significant opportunities for students to spend time studying at universities in Asia, with a strong focus on language competency and socio-cultural immersion. And I would particularly draw reference to our Year in Asia program, which is a one-year additional period of study that students from a range of undergraduate degrees at ANU can add on to their period of study. We deliver teaching in 16 Asian languages. Many of those are offered online to learners across Australia and to students from all areas of the ANU campus. Our provision of languages is underpinned by the National Institutes grant provided to the ANU. The 2024 NIG report indicates some $6.2 million across Asian culture, history and language as part of the overall NIG allocation to the ANU was provided, underscoring and enabling our national role on behalf of Australia and the particular role we play within the higher education landscape. Our submission to the inquiry outlined a range of barriers and enablers to Asian capabilities, from a definition of Asia capability as the linguistic, cultural, social, geographical, political and historical knowledge of Asia, where this knowledge is accessible, comprehensible and actively used by decision makers across public, private, cultural and economic institutions within Australia. We suggest the benefit of conceiving of Asia capabilities as an ecosystem, a range of stakeholders across different institutions linked together in ongoing discussion where knowledge is developed, sought and exchanged. Based on this definition, our submission identified the following barriers to Asia capability. A sense of elitism in understanding what Asia capability may be, who may possess it, how it is shared, and who has the right to access and develop their Asia capability across their careers and indeed their lives. Educational infrastructure that is often disconnected, inequitably distributed, poorly maintained, poorly resourced, including human resource, and lacks visibility across the ecosystem as a whole. Alongside a perception that engaging with Asia and its languages is particularly difficult and something that is best avoided. Isolation between producers of knowledge around Asia and those who would benefit from its effective translation and dissemination. A growing normalisation of racist and xenophobic attitudes which impact on the experience of Asian Australians and international students from the region. And a lack of consistent funding and indeed signalling across government policy settings about the significance, the importance and the career benefit of undertaking study either in Asian regions or Asian languages. We suggest that neither the market nor the higher education sector alone are able to address and successfully overcome these barriers. What we feel is needed is strong leadership from the federal government, which must include long-term, consistent, bipartisan policy signalling and setting, as well as active measures to enable this ecosystem to flourish in sustainable ways. We suggest that these may include a stocktake of existing capabilities and their supporting networks across all sectors, identifying areas of strength and weakness, opportunities and challenges. Recognition of the mutually reinforcing nature of this network, and in particular the role of government in providing coherent and integrated frameworks that incentivise the behaviour of actors within those systems. Investment in building strength in the education sector, especially through high quality language teaching, both before and at university, but also throughout curricula, and the creation of support mechanisms that identify and actively support the centrality of Asia capability in all areas of education across HAS and STEM. Part of this approach, we believe, must include price signalling and measures to make visible the benefits of Asia capability to the nation and to individual careers. Firm leadership that affirms Australia's commitment to its role in the region and the value of Asia and the role of Asian Australians to our national identity and future success as a nation, and strong and wide-ranging, and I would emphasise consistent research investment in projects that benefit both Asia and Australia across the full range of disciplines. I'll hand over to my colleague to speak about languages.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chair. So I'll just point specifically to issues around languages. As we've heard from many submissions and hearings, Asian language education in Australia is at a critical turning point, and the decisions that are made now, both at a hyperlocal level of individual schools and families, right through to the policies implemented at federal, state levels, state and territory levels, will have a decisive impact on our Asia capabilities in the future. Although some individual Asian languages, such as Korean and Japanese, have recorded modest growth in some schools in the same period, overall language enrolments have declined precipitously in the last 25 years across the education sector. In almost all cities and regions in Australia, especially in the public system, there is a disconnection between Asian language programs offered at different school levels and in different zones. No clear pathways for students to become proficient, program precarity exacerbated by tension between workforce constraints and a lack of full-time Asian language teaching roles, programs that operate in isolation from their school communities, or indeed programs that are only offered as off-site extracurricular or extension programs. Only the most committed students with exceptional support make it through that system to study Asian languages at Year 11 and 12, and this further erodes the capacity of schools to employ full-time language teachers. The rare and shining exceptions to this pattern stand as beacons that demonstrate the potential, but they also illustrate the limited access that most students face. And this has significant knock-on effects at the tertiary level, where Indonesian provides a pertinent case study. Programs have shrunk from 22 in 1992 in tertiary Indonesian programs to just 10 in 2025, and there's a likelihood of further closures. 25 years ago, in the year 2000, over 300,000 children studied Indonesian in Australian schools. Those numbers have dropped dramatically, and Year 12 enrolments at Indonesian have dropped from over 1,100 in 2010 to just 542 in 2023. That's the latest data that we have. At the ANU, a comparison of our enrolment data from Indonesian language in the year 2000 shows a really strong correlation between the depth of student achievement and the availability of high school programs. So in the year 2000 enrolments at ANU, when we had students transferring from high school programs into our tertiary programs, we had a top-heavy enrolment, so our advanced courses had nearly double the enrolments that our beginners programs has, which is the inverse of what we experience now. We have many more students in our beginner programs, and that drops off as we move towards advanced courses. So in other words, more students used to arrive at uni with strong foundations, and then were able to begin their tertiary study at higher levels and then go on to stronger proficiency, and from there go to higher degree research or significant positions in government and the private sector in bilateral and multilateral relations. Others trained as teachers, perpetuating the supply of high quality Asian language teachers in Australia. That pipeline is now broken. Across the ANU College of Asia and the Pacific, 16 languages, Indonesian, Korean, Japanese, Mandarin, Cantonese, Burmese, Thai, Vietnamese, Tetum, Hindi, Sanskrit, Mongolian, Literary Chinese, Taiwanese and Tok Pisin, almost all have experienced significant falls in enrolments since 2020, between 50 and 60% in our major languages. And interestingly, the performance of what we call the less commonly taught languages is more stable, which gives further evidence that the pipeline coming through for major languages has a major effect on the numbers that we receive and the level to which they can achieve proficiency when they're in tertiary studies. ANU has a long-standing commitment and a legislated mandate to pay attention to its national and international roles and the needs of Australia and the region, as well as the ACT. And training in Asian languages is key to our responsibilities in this regard. It's highlighted also in the 2024 NIG report, which is publicly available. Moreover, one of our core functions is to provide research expertise on Asia and the Pacific, and producing graduates who have the language facility to go on to higher degree research is imperative to fulfilling this function. But we cannot do it alone. And without public and private investment in the networks of knowledge and capability that lay strong foundations for our young people as they come through the school system, this depth of knowledge will be reserved for those few graduates who take the non-normative leap to Asian language study. And Australia will eventually become considerably constrained in our Asia capability, or potentially completely lacking in our Asia capability. Not only that, in our increasingly diverse and multicultural society, we risk becoming strangers to our own community and ancestors, a place where language comes to be forgotten and policy serves to reinforce the norms of a century ago. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that opening statement. Can I start with the same question that I asked the universities that appeared earlier this morning, which is, continuing the current trajectory, what will Asian language studies or Asian area studies in Australia look like in 10 years' time? And is the nature of the challenge that we are facing in Australia with those courses of study existential?
Let me commence, if that's okay. I'll give you a very short answer and then a longer answer. Is the challenge existential? Yes. Should we be worried? Also, yes. What trends are we seeing? So we're seeing student choice move away from selecting longer durations of study, focusing either on an individual language from Asia or a program. So to give you an example, our Bachelor of Asian Studies, which offers 2 years of focused study on Asia, including Asian languages, has seen a decline over the last 6 years of about 60%. I can give you EFTSL numbers if you're particularly interested. Does that mean that... That's
a decline in effectively student numbers?
Yes, that's the way. We count student numbers in a slightly different way, so it's not heads, it's our total student load. That number is, as Ellie can talk about, is surprisingly or strikingly similar to what we see in declines across a whole range of things. It's not that every student is saying, I don't want to study Asia as a region or the regions of Asia or language. It's that they seem to be selecting fewer courses, more isolated courses and tasters of the region and the countries and cultures within it or the languages within it, rather than a depth of knowledge. Okay, and so does this mean in 10 years there will be no knowledge of Asia, whether it's languages or regions? No, it does not. But I do have grave concerns for the depth of that knowledge and the specialisation around that knowledge. There's a difference in competence between somebody who has spent 2-3 years studying Asia, culture and language, and somebody who's done a couple of electives in those things. And I think that's the trend that really worries me. It's not going from 100 to 0, but it is that trend away from depth and specialisation.
I mean, one of the paradoxes that people sort of put to me is that, in one sense, the Australian government is doing more than ever before in terms of our engagement with the region, signing more agreements, being more active in the region than ever before. And people say to me, how can that be when we're having this crisis in capability? I think what that misconceives is what you're pointing to there. There's this pipeline of building this capability, and that the people in those rooms making those decisions, negotiating those deals now are the product of investments made decades before in building the ecosystem that you referred to.
Absolutely.
And I take you to your sub where you talk about the risk of, quote, the retirement of a generation of scholarly leaders in Asian studies. Australia's Asia-related research excellence is increasingly patchy, both across disciplines and in terms of country sub-region expertise. The retirement of senior generations of academics causes the number of PhD students entering Asian studies to decline, making it increasingly difficult to refresh our academic expertise from Australian-trained PhD students. Are we approaching will we approach a cliff in this respect? I mean, what's coming through the pipeline in terms of, as you say, the in-depth Asian expertise in academia?
Is it a cliff? I don't know if I would characterise it as a cliff. I suspect it is a steep hill, however.
The geographer in here.
Yeah, there is a feedback loop between sort of the seniority, the publicity, and then the quality of research at those absolute higher levels, and then who is able to seek their doctoral candidature with them, especially if that requires language skills, of course, and in-country travel and knowledge. And then the broader sort of framework in which PhD students reply to universities and then seek supervision in those. And again, I would emphasise the point you just made, Chair, that the situation we face now is really the consequence of ongoing uncertainty and change and decline in some of these positions. There are excellent, outstanding PhD scholars in the pipeline. I think we should acknowledge and celebrate and welcome that fact. But I do feel that pipeline is weaker than it is before, especially when it requires language capability. And I worry that then creates gaps and inconsistencies in our breadth of knowledge across Asia, because we don't have PhD scholars who study Asia, we have PhD scholars who are experts in one sub-dimension of it. And I think that's a concern.
Can I add, if I may? We also, I mean, it may be more stark in some language or some areas than others. We do have really excellent cohorts of PhD students who come as international students as well, but they're now the dominant numerically students in HDR degrees. At our ANU Indonesia Institute postgraduate workshop this year, we had 2 applicants who were domestic candidates, and the rest of the 30 applicants were international candidates. And they're excellent candidates, and they'll be outstanding contributors to their home countries when they return. But our domestic pipeline our domestic expertise is really very small. And I think part of this is, in some senses, there's a lack of a larger cohort. So there's such small numbers coming through with language expertise that once they filter off into the various career pathways they can take, there's only a couple who are left taking HDR research degrees, and then there are fewer also in other areas where we need to be focusing on developing, for instance, our teachers of Asian languages or Asia capability in schools, in primary and secondary school.
I'll ask one more question, then I'll throw it to Ms. Coffey. Can I ask, what would we lose if we were forced to obtain this kind of in-depth Asia expertise from international universities, from universities outside of Australia? Does our foreign policy development process benefit from an Australian perspective on Asian studies? Do Australian academics focus on, for example, countries that may be more significant to Australia than in other bilateral relationships, or do Australian academics focus on issues that are more important to the Australian national interest, our perspective, than other countries? What would we lose by not having a sovereign capability in Australia to have this depth of Asia expertise?
I think we would lose the ability to talk amongst ourselves about our collective future, because knowledge in and of itself is not necessarily the same as legitimate membership of a conversation. And I can't speak about security, and you had DFAT this morning. I think we would we would outsource vital things that tell us not only about our region, but about ourselves, and about ourselves as a multicultural society and a multicultural nation, and an Asian country and society, where our future comes from and is embedded in that region. These aren't simply stories or narratives about economic success or foreign policy success. These are frameworks for understanding ourselves and our collective future. And I worry that would be outsourced, because that would rest on the view that knowledge is neutral, that it can come from anywhere, and that it is equally valuable. And I don't think that is the case. I think the benefit of a sovereign capability is that it is part of the storytelling of this country. It is our collective future. And having that onshore in accessible ways, in ways that we have control over through policy settings, whether that's in or beyond higher education, those are all things that I think are fundamental to maintaining the ability to understand our neighbours, to understand ourselves, and to do so on our own terms.
So you're saying that there's value in the way that the ecosystem itself operates and mediates knowledge and shares knowledge and builds connections, and there's value in having that ecosystem operating domestically.
Absolutely. I wouldn't say that ecosystem has to be isolated from things that happen overseas. So we're not talking about some autarkic knowledge production system. But I do think that there's great benefit that it is amongst ourselves and that it comes from onshore, because if there ever was a crisis in a particular country, if there ever was something that the government or one dimension of Australia wanted to know about, and we could only get those answers from overseas, even when it's, perhaps it's on Indonesia even, then that I think is a grave danger to our ability not only to act successfully in economic and transactional terms, but to deal with our partners as peers and to understand them as peers.
Okay. Ms. Coffey?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also for your submission and your comments this morning. It's been very interesting. My question is about that undergraduate pipeline. So the students that are coming in to undertake bachelor degree studies in Asian languages, is there a typical or standard profile of those students? There may not be. And if there is, what does that look like? And has that remained consistent over time, or have you seen shifts in the types of students, the backgrounds, the demographic, the makeup of the students that are undertaking undergraduate studies in Asian languages?
Do you want to tackle that from languages?
Yeah, I think you're right. There isn't a consistent profile, certainly not across all languages. Some languages that we teach at ANU do attract particular cohorts of students at the advanced levels. Our advanced Chinese courses and Japanese courses attract more international students, for instance. One thing that I would say has changed in the profile of students that come through our language courses in general is that it's become more diverse. It's not just white middle class kids anymore. It's a really diverse range of people from diverse backgrounds who are interested in diverse languages. So we certainly, I can probably speak more authoritatively about the Indonesia program into which I teach, and in that program I wouldn't say that there is a typical profile. We have a really diverse range of students coming through. We have heritage speakers who sometimes have a strong foundation and sometimes have no foundation of language or very little foundation. We have sometimes students coming through from high schools where they've had really excellent foundational knowledge, and some of those students will come through right up into our advanced levels in their first year. It's a very diverse range of students, I would say, in that program.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, do you see any trends with whether they're coming from the state schooling system or independent private schools?
I think it's fairly mixed in Indonesian. I would have to go back to the data to have a look at the broader language student profile. Yeah, certainly for people coming through to an advanced level, they are usually coming from private schools, but not exclusively.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just on the ecosystem. Oh, sorry, Mr. Soon.
Well, thank you, Chair. And look, thank you to you both for your introductory remarks. And look, I have to admit, I'm very proud to be an alumni of the ANU. And I was actually speaking at the Malaysia Institute not that long ago. It was great to see that capability in the organisation. One of the recommendations included in this submission was the establishment of a national Asian languages framework. I was wondering whether you could just talk us through a little bit more about how you see that being introduced and how you see that operating. I know you have a bit of detail in the submission, but just the real practicality of how you think that might work.
Yes, the practicality is probably the challenge for that, Mr. Soon. Thank you for the question. So what we're aiming at with that suggestion is an all-of-government framework that works across the different sectors of government, but also the different sectors of education, to provide a comprehensive approach to the way that Australia delivers language capability throughout the education sector, but also beyond. One of the models that we suggest looking at is National Science Week, and the focus that we currently have on STEM. So really just making visible the language pathways that exist, the career opportunities that exist, the national benefits that come from studying an Asian language, and the contribution that you can make to your community and to your nation if you have Asian language capability. The practicality in that is that many of the practicality challenge in that is that much of the STEM campaign or the focus on STEM is supported by industry, and that's something that we don't have as focused industry outcomes, I think, in language, because the benefits are so broad and the applications are not niche, but quite specific in a range of different industries. So getting that kind of support from industry would be more challenging, and that's another reason that we feel like this could be a role for a framework that includes higher education and education departments in states and territories, but also the federal government as a leading organisation.
And if I may jump in, Mr. Sun, I think part of that, we listened to the previous session. I think part of that would benefit from being a conversation around ensuring where ANU does offer 16 languages, many of which are not taught anywhere else, that there are pathways for accessibility from students. We do have cross-institutional enrolment in many of our courses, but as you indicated in the previous session, there are bureaucratic hurdles to those, which sometimes cause impediments. And I think having a national framework would want to include ensuring, yes, before they enter university, but also whilst at any university in Australia, they have access to these national capabilities. And I think that needs to be part of that conversation.
Thank you for that, Dr. Davies, Dr. Kent.
Thank you.
Do you want to just sort of drill down a little bit more on that? I mean, I understand that extraordinarily enough, ANU is the only Australian university offering in-person teaching of Hindi. Is that right?
Yes, now, yes.
And what has your experience been like providing that kind of those pathways, that connectivity to students from other institutions that may want to study that? I mean, what is the practical experience of that been like in a bureaucratic sense, in a process sense?
I think that's one of the challenges that is quite prohibitive for many students, because that bureaucratic challenge comes down to the individual student to negotiate, really. Universities can set up agreements that facilitate that, but in most universities we don't practically need the agreements between universities in order for students to enrol cross-institutionally. It's usually feasible for students to do that of their own accord, but it is not easy. So there are hurdles with their home institutions. They may encounter hurdles with our institution as well in terms of the kind of support they get throughout the bureaucratic process, through the sort of answers they might get, and the timeliness of answers they might get from either institution, and consistent messaging around that across different institutions. So it's very challenging, and only really committed students will be able to do that. And I think that's one particular hurdle for teachers as well, or aspiring teachers, to be able to study language as well as an education degree.
Do you have anything to add to the conversation of the previous witnesses about the potential role that the National Tertiary Education Commission could play in fostering collaboration and pathways to promote access to these language courses, these area studies expertise?
I think, thank you for the question. I think the more that we can lift the burden from the individual, the individual student who may seek or who may want to but actually doesn't know that they have these opportunities. If there is the more the framework itself and the shared process enables student choice with as little friction as possible, the better. I think one of the things that stands out to me is the greater the obstacles to the individual students, the more it is only the most motivated, so that requires they already know and are already interested in. Only the most motivated students move through that process to actually get the training that they're looking for, the experiences that they're looking for. I think there would be great benefit for institutionalising a shared set of common pathways that allowed students and was proactive in explaining to students, these are your options, this is how we will do it for you. All you need to do, ideally, is to express the interest within, so far as you can, within the award rules of your home institution, and then we will move that through the process for you. I think that sort of opening the doors and then streaming the traffic through the doors is nothing but a great benefit. And if you would add anything?
No, I think that speaks also to the size of cohorts that will come through. We just won't get large numbers of students when there are so many hurdles to taking up these pathways, and if the pathways aren't even visible, then that will be an even narrower number of students. And that also speaks to the equitable distribution and the diversity of students that we will have taking up these pathways. If we really want to appeal to a broad cross-section of the Australian community, and we want Asia capability represented across our entire community, then it needs to be much more accessible, easy to navigate, and assisted.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask a few questions about that funnel streaming students into universities then, and just drill down on schools and teachers a little bit? So your submission says that Asian languages must be protected from short-term curriculum change. Government departments should have embedded authority to protect pathways supported by funded specialist units to assist schools in meeting their obligations. Certainly one of the things that concerns me in Indonesian studies is this drumbeat we've seen of schools closing programs. In my observation, often it's triggered by a teacher moving on, the one teacher that's been championing things, and then a principal, taking a decision to move into another language because it might be a easier pathway to teach. Well, in the experience of my community, Italian or Greek or something like that. Can you talk a little bit about how you see we can best protect Indonesian studies at individual schools? Like, what are the institutional mechanisms that we can put in place to help protect the programs that exist at the moment from further closures?
Yeah, I think it's very complex because there's a tension between this, so teachers moving on, but teachers are moving on also because there is often a limited amount of teaching they can do in one language in a school because of small programs. So it can be difficult to fulfil a full-time role in one school. So we do sometimes see teachers at least here in the ACT, working across different schools, which is extremely challenging and not great for their career progression. So teachers sometimes make decisions to leave language teaching for the sake of their careers, or even just for the sake of full-time employment. So that's one complexity that would, if we were able to address that through our directorates and departments, that would help to make our language programs in schools less precarious. The other problem then is that when teachers make those decisions, there is not a large cohort of language teachers coming through our tertiary education system either. So there's no sort of replacement, there's no succession plan at this point for language teachers, in the same way that our expertise that came through the system in the 80s and 90s in Indonesian language is now at the top or the peak of their careers in government sectors and private sectors. Teachers are also reaching the end of their careers or points where they want to be moving into leadership positions, and that means there's a vacuum.
Are there language teachers associations? I mean, I know that there are for maths and for STEM and things like that. Are there kind of institutional mechanisms that can aggregate information about who's available, career mentoring, things like that, outside of the either school or education department context?
There are both inside the education directorates and departments and outside of the education system, or across the different sectors, because of course there are education departments. There's also the Catholic Education Office and other representative bodies. So they also there are also networks that exist across those different areas. They are challenging to maintain, and it's a lot of labour for teachers as well. It's a lot of individual extra work, and as we know, teachers are already extremely stretched in what they're asked to deliver in their schools. So
they're not paid advocacy organisations.
I'm not sure about some of them. There is the Modern Language Teachers Association, but there are also I can speak to in the ACT, we have teacher groups for each language. My understanding is that those roles are not embedded into their teaching roles, so they're not paid as such. Yeah.
Yep. I'll just ask one more question about teachers, and then I'll throw back to Mr. Soon. So your submission also suggests that, quote, we recommend a systemic reconsideration of how we identify and train Asian language educators, talking about where we draw teachers from, potential the different backgrounds of teachers. But in the pedagogical sense, what kind of support are teachers getting to adopt kind of emerging new practices in the use of AI-supported learning, things like that? It's sort of an increasing expectation from kids that to be engaged and to be effective, that this is embedded in their learning. Are you aware of what is best practice in this space with respect to the use of generative AI in the teaching of language? How is that being rolled out in Australia, if at all?
So I am probably not best placed to answer that question, but I believe that you will be speaking next week to Zara Maxwell-Smith, who may well have much better understanding of that across in the K-12 education system. It's something that in the ANU at the moment that we are really just beginning to grapple with. Individual teachers are working with it within their programs, and we're working towards a more consolidated and comprehensive way of managing the negative aspects of that within our programs, but also maximising the opportunities and working out how we can integrate it in positive and constructive ways. And there are certainly many ways that it could support our teaching, but yes, we're really at the beginning of that journey at the ANU in any case.
And if I may add, Chair, again, listening to the previous session, I do think there is a concern that we share. I forget who raised it earlier this morning, that AI suggests, when it's sort of placed next to language learning, that these are technical competencies that can be outsourced. Let me slightly rephrase. I'm confident that the majority, perhaps all, of our language courses, especially the advanced level language courses, yes, of course, they are focusing on technical language competence, vocabulary, and that sort of thing, but they are also doing so through and in juxtaposition with cultural competence and aptitude and cross-cultural sensitivities. Those are things that can't be outsourced to AI, at least if we want to ensure the integrity of them. And I think there is a conversation that needs to be had, and is being had and should continue to be had, that language learning isn't just and only and reducible to the technicalities of language learning. It is about, through that process, developing cultural awareness, both about the culture that uses that language, but also about your home culture and the differences in language between them. And I think that's an area of concern around how AI and language are intersecting at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Singh?
Thank you, Chair. My question, and no doubt it's informed much of your submission, I know one of the flagship programs at the ANU is the Asian Studies kind of degree. I was just asking in regards to, well, what's some of the feedback you've heard from students over the years about, well, what attracted them to that degree in the first place? What did they find particularly effective during that program and within that studying the language? I guess, was there anything that we can learn from the ANU's Asian Studies program, both in terms of attraction, but then the experiences that students had in it, that we can learn from more broadly?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mr. Soon. It's an excellent question. We recently undertook a review of the Bachelor of Asian Studies as part of our regular reaccreditation cycle. So we've had conversations recently that talk to the question you ask. I think the most immediate thing I would say is that the appeal of Asian studies, especially historically, is because of the vibrancy of the region together, or the regions that comprise Asia, together with the opportunity to develop depth in study. The Bachelor of Asian Studies is really the only place where you can, if you wish, undertake almost an entire 2-year study sequence focusing on a particular area and the associated language within it. I think the struggle that we have had, to reverse the question a little, but hopefully helpfully, the struggle we have had is that the perceived value of that depth has declined over time. It's not that students think that knowing about Asia or an Asian language is irrelevant to their future. It's that they think that they can do so in less and less depth compared to perhaps what we think is a necessary and important amount of specialization. The vibrancy of Asia, obviously the culture we spoke about, or you spoke about K-pop and things in the previous session, when those things sort of burst through into the Australian mainstream, I think that does have an amplifying effect. But I think it is increasingly an uphill struggle for us, at least, to sell that to students who may be wishing for broader degrees rather than something that seems to be very focused and very in-depth. I think that's probably a misreading of what Asian Studies is, and I think we have work to do to clarify that with our students, but that is the feedback that I am being given. If you would add anything, Ellie?
I think I would just add that one of the highly valued aspects of our Asian Studies degree is the opportunity for study overseas. So our mobility programs, learning language locally, gives students an opportunity to spend a few weeks or a few months, a semester, or if they undertake a year in Asia or an exchange unit, they can spend a year studying at a university in Asia in the language that they've been specialising in studying during their degree. So I think that if not an attracting feature for prospective students, is certainly one of the aspects of the degree that students really value once they're in the degree and they begin taking these mobility programs.
We're effectively at time, but I'll just ask one more question. I'm interested in the kind of connectivities between the different levels of education and how we pull through students from one to another. And your submission suggests that, quote, national funding should be established to create opportunities for school students to experience tertiary level taster classes related to languages and cultural studies. Can you provide a bit more detail about what that could look like? And similarly, the potential and what we would need to look at in order to enable high school students to perhaps study for credit from high school as a way of pulling them through to university?
I think I'll start with one thing. Thank you, Chair. One benefit of a program like that would be that we could extend in every state and territory, extend the experience of studying Asian languages or studying Asian studies to students in regional schools where there is much less delivery of Asian languages and Asia capability in schools. So that would be one benefit in terms of diversifying the amount of students that, or the kind of student that come through to tertiary studies when they finish school, or that have an experience of it that might influence their choices at the end of their Year 12 journey. Did you want to speak to?
One of the things I would add to what Ellie has said, Chair, is there would be really interesting opportunities around online provision. Obviously, as the national university, our remit is the nation. I know this was raised in the previous session, but not for all of our languages, but for the less commonly taught languages, we do have online learning available, I think, for all of them, across the courses. So we do have a developed framework that could be used as a foundation to reach out to schools beyond Canberra. I think we would need, I take your suggestion around 4 credits. I think we would need to approach that carefully, simply in terms of what are our obligations or what are the obligations of schools. That's certainly something that we could investigate in the future, but I suggest again that might need a little bit of care just to make sure that we're following it in the appropriate and accredited manner.
I think there are examples in other states where students have had access to language courses as part of their Year 11 and 12 study at university. So I think there are probably, as this sort of speaks to our suggestion that we need to map the networks of capability and capacity that already exist and really examine how they work and what they achieve, and how we can scale up those kind of approaches and make sure that they're more accessible to more parts of our society. I think national funding to create these experiences for school students wouldn't just be just about ANU. This would be something that we would see as part of every state and territory, and it may intersect with some of the suggestions that were discussed earlier in the sessions with UQ, Uni Melbourne, University of Sydney as well.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, we are unfortunately at time. So thank you for your attendance today, for your advocacy and submissions on this issue. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence, and we'll have the opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. Please send your responses to any questions taken on those during this hearing to the Secretariat by the close of business on Wednesday, 17 December 2025. I now declare this hearing closed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.